Kia ora, everyone. I have the honor and the pleasure to introduce Catherine Murupaenga-Ikenn. This is a very special seminar. We talk about, the historical process, the recovery, we put foreshortened back, and I didn't talk about Te Papa protest because Te Papa protest was the last one, and I wanted one of the person who actually was the mind behind that, and one of the actors of the protest. Being here and talk to you about it, right? And Catherine will explain to you her experience. Let me just introduce briefly Catherine Murupaenga-Ikenn. She's a Māori human rights advocate and activist. She has an extensive experience in international arena with the Office of Human Rights. She facilitated like big regional and international meetings on business and human rights organized by the United Nations. That's actually I met Catherine. She was facilitating a very complex meeting in the Pacific. Thank you, Catherine.
Starting with a big kind of statement or question, you'll see the connection with me and my activism through this question, the keyhole of this question. We're powerful, creative, sovereign beings, people are, and we're here to express our fullest potential. What comes up when you hear that, when you hear someone say that? What emerges for you and what it makes you feel? Because it's rare these days, isn't it, that such an audacious idea is spoken out loud, and even rarer for someone to invite you to consider this as truth. Now, I imagine some of you in the room will be like, yes, I'm into that big idea, 100%. I've always believed that to be true. And others of you may be experiencing resistance or cognitive dissonance and find that proposition, a bit hard, if not impossible to accept. And to know we have a kaupapa, which is to say a purpose to our existence that gives our lives meaning beyond just an obedient consumer chasing a hollow materialistic kind of success, which we've been hypnotized into believing is for our own well-being, but which is, with some critical analysis, ultimately revealed to be for the benefit of a cabal of colonial oligarchic masters, with us ordinary folks as essentially their expendable slaves. Experts like Richard Wolff, he reminds us that the world's dominant economic system, capitalism, is fundamentally a form of patriarchal oppression. First, there was this relationship of slave and master, and then came this relationship of the serf and the landowner, the landlord. And today we have the employee and the employer relationship. It's basically about those relative few who control capital and labor and the masses of the rest of us in servitude. And what that dynamic does is it creates an unequal distribution of wealth and power. That's really what we're getting down to. Power and decision making at the top, which often leads to exploitation and human rights violations of those of us at the bottom. And of course, it tends to result in destruction of the natural environment. So why am I saying all of this to you? I'm advocating the truth in the hopes that you will feel something that will put a fire under you and inspire you to take action. Because your ability to feel and then to act in a tika, pono, aroha way, in alignment with that feeling, is actually a superpower. Tika is what is right. It's what is correct. And pono is what is true or has integrity. And aroha is those baskets of ideas like compassion and caring, understanding, love. I just wanted to say too that the difference between tika and pono, because sometimes it's not that obvious, is, for example, I use the example of human law. It used to be the law that women didn't have the right to vote, for example, or it was you know, okay for people to own slaves. That was the law, that was tika in that time, but it was never pono. It was never any concept that had real integrity. It wasn't fair and it wasn't equitable in that regard. You could probably imagine some laws on the books today that may be tika but aren't pono. Just let that percolate with you for a moment. So back to the proposition, you're a powerful, creative, sovereign being here to express your fullest potential. Because right now, Aotearoa needs, in fact, the world needs a scaling up of ordinary people, people like you and me, to feel and recognize the truth that we are powerful, sovereign beings. Because the problem is, we, not just Māori, but all New Zealanders, have had to confront a progressive attack of our human rights by successive governments. Māori leadership have already declared this government to be our enemy. And it's my sincere hope that masses of ordinary New Zealanders will also see the light and join with us in our campaign for a political takedown of what's become a fascist state. I mean, a government that's basically in a marriage with corporations to the point that these unelected entities and their sick pathological agendas are basically running the show. Now, like I said, Māori, we're already there. We're good to go. I was brought up to believe that humans are descendants of the atua, the supernatural ancestors. It tracks back ultimately to Io Matua Kore, Io, the parentless one, Io, the primordial sovereign creator. DNA running through our veins. It's our inevitable destiny, despite any contrasting imperfections and transgressions along the way. And I don't want to romanticize, Māori history. We've had our, ups and downs. We are destined, however, to connect with our fullest divine potential. The universe and the ancestors have that fundamental kaupapa, that mission or purpose baked in. Therefore, that is our core true identity as Māori and something we're compelled to be and do. Even when we forget from time to time, when as individuals or as peoples, we fall off the bandwagon, and obviously we have done. Okay, for example, succumbing to the destructive impacts of colonization. Eventually, though, we will awaken, remember who we are truly, and reboot and rise up to honour our calling in our land. So when colonizers enter into the picture, and in their hubris attempt to suppress our authority and spiritual power derived from the supernatural ancestors in our land, they should expect resistance. Ka pū te ruha, ka hau te rangatahi. As the old net degrades, another is remade. And in the context of activism, this is to say, when one leader falls, another leader will rise. So you're never going to get rid of us. You might think, oh, we'll just, try and quell this uprising or that or whatever. But the truth will live. The truth has its own life force and its own desire to live. So you can never really stamp it out. So we're compelled. Then on top of all of those cultural factors that shape me, for the most of my adult life, I've been engaged in activism in one form or another, in human rights and environmental defence, although I may not have used those labels at the time to describe it, what I was doing, but I was just doing what came natural to me. Because it's like you have what we call the Kawa of the universe. That's like a super construct of high level or fundamental forces and principles laid out as like the container of your life. Like you have Kawa on the marae, they're the protocols, they don't change. You can also extrapolate that idea of Kawa on the marae to Kawa in the bigger picture of the universe. You also have your own mana tangata. That's the authority and power of the human being. The mana to exercise tikanga, your personal free will, which is like how you play the game. So Kawa is like the rules of the game, and your tikanga is like how you play on that field. So to explain a bit about my life choices, and I tell you this as a setup to help you understand more about what drives me, and eventually it'll become clearer as to why I chose to involve myself in the Te Papa artivism action in December. So after I graduated with a conjoint degree in law and philosophy, my first job was as a policy analyst with the Ministry of Māori Development head office in Wellington, to be specific. And there I was assigned to work on matters like Māori land lease reform, treaty claims, obviously, historical treaty claims, the Y262 flora and fauna claim, also known as the Mātauranga Māori or traditional knowledge claim, and other matters. And then I moved across the road, literally across the road in Wellington, to a major law firm and working for a Māori unit within that firm, only to have the firm betray our unit by choosing the Crown client over one of the iwi that we had been building a relationship with that whole year. So that was devastating. It was so crushing that the head of our unit, Gina Rudland, she resigned. And eventually we all followed her lead. We just didn't have the heart to stay. We didn't want to stay. Who would? And then when my iwi of Te Raroa heard about that, they snapped me up to return home to project manage our historical land claim settlement negotiations with the Crown. That was at the turn of the millennium. And in 2008, I was elected as a negotiator for my other iwi of Ngāti Kuri for our treaty settlement negotiations over there. And in between all of that, I completed an Indigenous fellowship with the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which was an intense 5-month-long training based in Geneva in all of the mechanisms and instruments that protect and promote Indigenous human rights. And I participated in numerous hikoi, protest marches and other campaigns, and I advocated for Indigenous human rights internationally at the UN. I also became a mum. And I tell you, that changes your perspective on life right there. It puts a whole nother layer of urgency on things. And across all those different positions, Te Tiriti or Waitangi and its imposter counterpart, the so-called Treaty of Waitangi, was inescapably a staple part of my working landscape. In other words, it was just a normal part of my adult life. But were it not for that, I suspect I would have today been largely ignorant about Te Tiriti and this fake English so-called Treaty of Waitangi. And this, I believe, largely is why there's so much confusion and subsequently conflict in our society about Te Tiriti and this alleged treaty that's meant to be floating around somewhere. Because the fact is, there isn't, to my knowledge, a school curriculum which adequately, in good faith, teaches our children about, the truth about Te Tiriti, the history of the Māori Crown relationship. In particular, that Te Tiriti is the only legitimate, internationally legally binding instrument signed between hapu chiefs and the representative of the Queen of England. There is no English treaty in existence at all. It's a fantasy. It's made up and perpetrated by the colonizer. Not just misinformation, not just a mistake made in ignorance, not just disinformation, not a flat out lie, but in my humble opinion, it's malinformation, a lie intended to cause loss and prejudice. In short, harm. To who? Predominantly Māori. Something you should be outraged about, by the way. You should be raising your voices loudly about this. So some of you may be aware of the legal principle or rule of contra proferentem. When there's ambiguity. So exactly that. That rule has not been applied. Go figure. And very curious to me, I could never figure out why these things called the principles of the treaty have had so much force, because there shouldn't even be a conversation about that. The first conversation should have been only Te Tiriti should be observed and everything else is kind of like fuzz. So that's, yeah, really bizarre. So welcome to my world, anyways, is the bottom line. It's, you have pretty good insight now into, you know, how my mind works. And this should give you a bit of a tease as to why I'm the activist and defender that I am. If we fail to act with all due haste now, to take a strong justice stance, there's likely not going to be much left to salvage in the very near term. Indigenous peoples have been screaming for generations about how the Western world's trashing people and the planet, so this shouldn't be news. I want to turn to the specifics about the Te Papa Tongarewa action. I need to give a special shout out to the Waka Hourua, Māori climate justice advocates and tangata Tiriti allies. Now, I'm a founding member of the Waka Hourua. We established ourselves back in 2019 as an arm of Extinction Rebellion, Aotearoa, which, by the way, I reckon should be called Extermination Rebellion, because the phrase extinction, you know, that's too passive. That's being a bit disingenuous. It's very clear that there are deliberate agendas by pathological actors to increase their profits and power at any cost, even if it means they're externalizing their suicidal costs of production onto people and the planet to do it. Now, you might recall that in December last year, the Waka Hourua undertook an artivism action at Te Papa Tongarewa. It's New Zealand's National Museum. This action was actually the sequel to when Te Waka Hourua occupied Te Papa in 2021. And back then we opposed the lie. At the time, Te Papa assured us that they'd remedy the situation and correct the malinformation that was hanging on their wall. A lie which Te Papa erected in their permanent exhibition, Treaty of Waitangi, Signs of a Nation. And as you're probably well aware, that draft text that's on the wall says that Māori ceded sovereignty. That's a blatant lie. It's a lie which Te Papa erected in that space over 20 years earlier, despite the credentialed advice from a Māori advisory group, including eminent authorities such as justice and legal expert Moana Jackson and others, who told Te Papa that they should ensure to tell the truth in that space by amplifying Māori perspectives about Te Tiriti. Instead, what Te Papa did was to say, we don't think the New Zealand public is ready for the truth about that, so we're not going to take your advice. What they did was to erect two massive facsimiles, one Te Tiriti and Te Reo Māori, and the other Hobson's draft treaty text, and they were directly opposite each other, giving this inference that the English artifact was a faithful translation of Te Tiriti. Now, guys, this is your national museum, right? A New Zealand government entity. And museums should be, to the best of their ability, preserving and presenting history as it is, not as they would like it to be, and certainly not favouring the colonisers' view over and above the truth in a way that essentially treats the whole citizenry of the country as stupid idiots. Because that's essentially what that act by Te Papa was. It was based on the paternalistic assumption that, oh, New Zealanders aren't mature enough to handle the truth, so we'll tell them what to think, and we expect that, being mindless morons, obedient to authority, and being ignorant because it wasn't taught in schools, they won't question it or go do their own research and find out the actual truth. If I were you, I'd be really upset at that. We were really upset at that. So we redacted the English text on the wall in that exhibit, so that Article 1 reads, no. All that we left, we blacked out everything else, and it just left the word no. And we redacted Article 2, so it reads, Her Majesty, the Queen of England is the alien. And we redacted Article 3, so it reads, ration the Queen's veggies. And why did we use that redactive approach? Well, that's because we went through a whole OIA request and Te Papa redacted a whole lot of information. So we thought we'd leverage that joke on them. So we really did it out of love. For my part, I'm now facing criminal charges of intentional damage. My court hearing is now scheduled for October 2025. By the way, this also exposes another crisis in our country, which is in the justice system. You know, people have to wait so long to get their day in court. And remember, justice delayed is justice denied. But I'd say ours was a very successful action. And it's good to get arrested because it gets you more exposure in the media industrial complex. We had demands that Te Papa, be truthful, take that exhibit down and correct it and apologise to the public for propagandising the public and develop a treaty education program. Now, some of these things haven't come to pass, but at least we've put the demands out there. I'm just going to leave it there.
I was wondering if they considered any other methods that were perhaps less, a little bit more legal, and whether obviously you probably knew the consequences, and whether you took that into account.
So the first one about how am I feeling about activism, protest, and Aotearoa. Look, New Zealand is known for punching above our weight. We're a little country, but we're mighty. As Māori people, we were into guerrilla warfare. I mean, we punched above our weight too. When the British soldiers came, confiscated our lands, and brought their guns and armies and such. At the start of that engagement, Māori were just fighting in the way that we best knew how. We didn't even have guns. Those British soldiers, they didn't know right from left. That is the stock that we come from. The women here in Aotearoa, we were the first to demand we have the right to vote. The apartheid protests in the 80s and no nukes. I mean, we've got a long history of being ruckus and making a noise and being audacious. And over the years, I just feel maybe New Zealand has got a bit dull with its activism. We've forgotten it's not just about, I talk a lot about human rights, but to be honest, we need to remember our civic duties as citizens. Democracy doesn't come easy. You've got to fight to get it and then maintain it. And when I'm talking about democracy, I don't mean the strict, democracy of the colonizer. We have an Aotearoa'n brand of democracy. It's different because Te Tiriti moderates the tyranny of the majority. And the majority these days seems to be an expression of corporate power. That's why I say New Zealand is a fascist government. I just get before crowds, whether it's, small or large or international, like here in the General Assembly of the UN in New York. I told them the UN was fascistic. And I encouraged other Indigenous peoples to boycott the UN. I have an expectation that things have gotten so bad now that the government, they've left us nowhere to go. And Māori have already declared we're building, we're reconstructing. And so watch the space. In fact, come and join us, because Māori can't do it alone. We are the minority in our own land, and we need other citizens to join us, because once they've taken all of our stuff, they'll come for everyone else's. We have a shared interest in that regard. Human rights, regardless of the colour of your skin, your ethnicity, any demographic, gender, socioeconomic class, doesn't matter. We should all be joining together. As to the question about, did we try other avenues? I would call that stuff diplomacy. Look, Māori have been doing diplomacy since 1835. Has it worked? Really? Rhetorical question game. Look, continue to do diplomacy. If that's your thing, if that's what floats your boat, all good. But it's not sufficient. And globally, actually, Indigenous peoples, so Māori are just like a microcosm of what's happening with Indigenous peoples around the world. Diplomacy has failed. Corporations don't care. You know why they don't care? Because they can buy diplomats. That's the point. That's why your government is fascist. So diplomacy works when the rules are fair. When they're not, it don't work. This is a quote somebody said. The job of the people is to make your government scared, is change your language. Start calling politicians public servants. Back in the day, that's what we used to call them, because they are ours. I pay my taxes. I've even been an official of the government working for the government. And I considered myself to be a servant of the people. But we need to remind them of that. You know, we need to hypnotize them. They've done enough propagandizing of us. It's time we turned the tables on them. And I mentioned we tried some diplomatic channels. We used the OAA, we went to the Ombudsman when we knew, Te Papa, when we asked for that official information, we asked them for all the complaints that had been made about that exhibit. And we knew there were complaints because people had told us there were complaints. I personally had complained. And what we got back, but we knew there was a whole lot of information missing. So we asked Te Papa again, can you give us all of your information, not just some of it? Because they're corrupt. So, they went, yeah, here's some more information we left out. But they still redacted heaps. So we went to the Ombudsman. It was like a year before that, because here's another crisis. The Ombudsman is short-staffed and undercapacitated. So you got all of these things about diplomacy, which are meant to be operating effectively, and they're broke. So it comes back to us, the people, to be resourceful with what we have. And look, we did our action out of love for the people, for our country, for our shared existence together here. We want to live in peace and harmony. I don't want my son and my granddaughter to have to be battling this. I've got better things to do. I'd rather be out in the garden. There's a gazillion good things I could be doing right now than this.
Thanks for explaining that. And you felt that there was no other solution because you tried to exhaust all the possible.
We were so generous. The establishment narrative, take it always with a pinch of salt. And the way they framed things, they framed us as the vandalizers or whatever. We did vandalism. I would contend that the colonizer is the vandal, and for 180 plus years, they've been vandalizing my land, my people, and all of you. They should be put in jail, not me.
Your protest was for the truth, right? Like, shouldn't be there, right?
Criminals shouldn't have the ability to hide behind the law.
If you can share a little bit with us those challenges that you are having as a consequence of your action.
Consequences. So I turned up to my first court hearing in Wellington, and then sometime later, my lawyer contacts me and says, there's a warrant out for your arrest. And I said, what? The justice system is saying you never showed at your court hearing. You're MIA. And I said, but you were there. You saw me there. All my family and friends and activist friends were there. They all saw me there. What gives? And the lawyer's like, I have no idea. Sometime later, actually it was January, I was at home by myself, minding my own business. Remember, I'm a grandmother. I must be a massive threat. They sent 2 cop cars round to my house. They sent a Māori man up front and the others behind. He goes, Catherine Murupaenga-Ikenn. I go, hello. Because I wasn't expecting, in my universe, I'm innocent. Yes, you know why we're here. And I went, nah, because I didn't. They said, we're here to arrest you. And I went, what for? And they said, because you didn't appear at your court. And I went, that's bollocks. So I got on the phone to my lawyer. My lawyer tried to explain to them, she was there. You guys have no legal grounds for arresting her. And they were like, sorry, we're just following orders. And they took me and they held me in a jail cell overnight. This is your banana republic, people. First it's me, next it could be any one of you. I went before the judge the next morning, she let me go. Yeah, also, when I was in Wellington, when I got arrested, I tried to move my court hearing up to Whangare, where I live. My sister and I, and she's also a smart cookie, so the two of us, we asked, how do we get my court hearing moved to Whangare? They gave us some instructions. You have to go to the district court and do the paperwork. We went there. They didn't even know what the process was. They didn't know how to do the paperwork. I was telling them how to do their job. So the whole system is just broken. And I was lucky. I had my sister's house to stay at in Wellington. If I had not, I would have had to sleep under a bridge while all this was getting resolved. So yeah, there are consequences. But the upside, there's always an upside in a fractal universe. The upside is I'm going to use my court hearing to further educate the New Zealand citizenry because they need to know the truth. Everyone should be celebrating defenders, not calling us the terrorists. We are not the terrorists. They are.
Guys,
Okay,
thank you
yeah,
so
we can
much,
put that up.
Catherine, for being with us. To
Thanks so
understand
much.